All right, I'm back at the Red House with Andy Tennille, and thank you for coming back over. I'm really excited to have you today.
Yeah, thanks for having me back out. I appreciate it. It was a lot of fun the last time.
Yeah, so you were, this is, I guess, kind of a special thing because you were the very first guest on the podcast, so it's kind of cool to circle back around.
Well, given you've invited me back, I feel like it went well the first time, so thanks for having me back again.
Well, as I mentioned when we met, when we were hanging out recently, it went well. You did fine, but I will admit one of my embarrassments was just when I look back on that one in particular. That was my most uptight podcast by a long shot. I was just I was definitely intimidated by this new medium, and so for me, I have a few things I want to talk to you about. I want to talk about like this milestone with Ramkat. I want to talk about the local scene, but I also kind of want to revisit some of your story that I failed to kind of really visit last time you were here because I was just nervous.
Yeah, so, sure. Whatever you want to talk about, I'm game.
Cool. Well, are you cool to just go ahead and jump into that story where we left off?
Absolutely.
Semi where we left off.
Yeah.
So I don't think I ever asked you previously where photography like really started.
Yeah.
Maybe I did. I think I have a vague memory of you talking about someone giving you a camera, or that might even be my buddy Corey. Regardless, what was it about photography that drew you in, like mentally?
Yeah, my dad was a photographer. Always had cameras around the house. They were always there. He was always shooting pictures of us, so there was always cameras there. And then I was probably 13 or 14, and I got a Minolta. He gave me a Minolta camera, film camera, and started shooting stuff, would shoot things when we were traveling or taking trips and whatnot. And then, I'm trying to think, high school, shot a lot of photos, mostly travel stuff, family kind of things. And then got to Wake Forest and was a journalism major, or history major, journalism minor, and kind of had always thought I was going to go and work for a newspaper or write for a newspaper. That was kind of what I wanted to do from the time I was a little kid. And did the minor and started writing for magazines. First kind of like Go Triad and Yes Weekly. And this is when I was still in college, writing like CD reviews for them or show reviews, stuff like that. When that was still a thing. ESP was the arts weekly that the Enterprise put out, because each of the each of the metropolitan newspapers had their own version of Relish, essentially. And so that's kind of how I started to build my clips as a young, person who wanted to get into journalism. I was writing for the Wake Forest student newspaper and then doing some stuff for the area arts and entertainment weeklies, and then started applying or submitting ideas to music magazines and started doing that, writing for them. And my last year at Wake, I'd taken like bowling and tennis twice, and just needed credits to graduate at that point in time. And I went to the photography teacher who's still there, John Pickle, and I guess initially I'd signed up for everything, like intro, intermediate, advanced photography, portraiture, lighting, all of it, all for my last semester at Wake Forest. And he called me or emailed me and said, you can't really do that. You have to take them one at a time. And I explained to him the situation, that it was my last semester, that I was already writing for magazines and newspapers, and that if he could help me on the photography side, which I already had an interest in, this could be a skill set that I could walk out the door and actually make money at immediately, which, in the world of liberal arts, that's kind of like, wow, this is cool. Yeah. You can actually go get paid for something you're going to learn immediately upon graduating from college. And he was into it. And so he signed off on, I think it was like a 16 credit independent study. And I spent pretty much the entire semester in the darkroom at Wake, learning processing, learning lighting, and primarily told him, I said, I'm most interested in doing low light concert photography. And so I'd go away on a weekend to a festival and shoot a bunch of film and then bring it back. And he'd sit there and work with me, developing it and critiquing it. and tell me what was right, what was wrong. And so it was awesome, such that when I started to submit, or when I was, kind of growing my portfolio and network of publications that I was working with, I could offer to write the article and do the photography, which was great. They essentially double your money a little bit. And did that for a long, long time. I graduated in 2000, went to work at the High Point Enterprise. Didn't shoot a lot of photos there because they had their own photography department, but I did a little bit. But I was still doing all the freelance work for Paste Magazine, Harp, a little bit at Spin. Started to get some interest from Rolling Stone in terms of writing, not necessarily on the photography side. And, was doing both for a long time until the calls for the photography became more prevalent than the writing side. And I just kind of followed it and was like, well, if they want me to do this, then I'll go do that. And ultimately that led to meeting the Heartbreakers in 2007.
Right. That's kind of where and I got a slightly longer version of that story up to that point. And there's plenty of room there for us to dig around a little bit more. But before that, I guess just hearing you talk, it's interesting. I was listening to a interview with Matt Taibbi last week, I guess, kind of a rock star among rock.
Oh man, he's the best.
Yeah. And there's something about your spirit, I guess, that when I was listening to him talk, I was kind of like, wow, he kind of reminds me of Andy in a way. And I wonder what there is, what about the music journalist, what is that identity? What is it about that drew you in to that world? Why do you care to document the music
That's a good
that
question.
happens?
That's a good question. It was probably because I grew up with my parents' vinyl collection, looking at all those photos, opening up the gatefolds, looking at all of the names and the information there, and then being a avid reader of Rolling Stone magazine from the time I was an early teen. And then kind of understanding, well, that's kind of the big magazine, but there's 4 or 5 magazines that are a little bit below Rolling Stone in terms of circulation or popularity. And so then, figuring out Spin, figuring out, when Paste came on the scene, that was wow, this is a new music magazine. This is great. And I happen to know some of the people who were involved. That's a really good question. I don't know what it was that attracted me to it, other than I just knew early on that I was going to be involved in music in some way, shape, or form.
Right.
And I had a passion for journalism. When I was a kid, I used to write little newspapers for my neighborhood and hand them out and go to people's door and hand them out. Or they were just Xerox copy kind of things. And so I had a passion for that and loved music. And then got really excited when I started to read some of the articles in Rolling Stone and other magazines, and kind of seeing names that I recognized, writers primarily. But then also at the same time, the same magazines, looking at the images and seeing some of the same names popping up. Annie Leibovitz, Jay Blakesberg, Jim Marshall, all of these amazing photographers who took these iconic pictures. And so it was one of those things where it was I love both of these things, and I'm going to try and do both if I can. And really, like I said, the impetus for the independent study was I'm getting paid a nickel or a dime a word for these articles. And then this guy or some person would be hired to do the photos for it. And then sometimes the photos were great, and then sometimes the photos weren't so good. And it was well, maybe I could carve out a career here in an industry that's pretty difficult to carve out a career to begin with. If I could do both and offer people both, I'll get paid a little bit more, and I can kind of have control over both the words and the images. I don't know if I answered your question, but I think that's as I was looking, reading old Rolling Stone, even, before I started to, read it regularly, Cameron Crowe's articles were he painted these pictures with his words that I could totally envision in my head. And it was I want to do that. That sounds cool, and it wasn't just the music stuff. I mean, you mentioned Matt Taibbi, kind of the heir apparent to Hunter Thompson, that kind of participatory journalism. that Hunter Thompson is very well known for. George Plimpton, similar thing. He was always, like he famously went to the Detroit Lions training camp and participated, and then wrote Paper Line about that. I always thought that kind of stuff was really cool. In Hunter Thompson's world, it was gonzo journalism. Plimpton wasn't necessarily going to label what he did, but it was the idea of not just being an observer, but being a participant. That really appealed to me. And I always found, especially Taibbi's another great example of someone who not only reports the story, but is in some ways a part of the story because they're embedded. That was very attractive to me early on.
That's really fascinating.
And now that I think about it, like the writing side, certainly I was interested and excited about it. And if you were to read any of my stuff from that era, it's very much of that slant. But now that I think about it and what I did, 10, 15 years later in terms of going out on tour with artists and documenting not only the show, but backstage and the interaction there, studio work, etc., it makes sense because it's like, oh, he likes telling stories and he likes being a part of it versus just like showing up and observing.
That makes a lot of sense. Mm-hmm. And even looking at your work and having seen it, and you have special looking work, mm-hmm. and it's what's special about it in a way is kind of stepping into the shoes of the person who took those photos. Like it's such an intimate. I remember there's a picture of John Moreland I saw at the show that was at Ramkat mm-hmm. that you took, and it was just this. It felt this intimacy that is not something that just anybody can even imagine, mm-hmm. like, and especially not compose it and take a picture in a way that like makes somebody else experience that level of being there, that level of kind of experiencing a moment. Mm-hmm. And it kind of hearing you talk about that kind of makes me understand your work more, I think.
Yeah, I mean, look, there are photographers who are far better photographers than I am from a technical perspective, no question whatsoever. I tons of my friends who are photographers, I would say, are well better than I am. I think the skill that I had or have is the ability to disappear in a room mm-hmm. and make everyone feel comfortable. There's been the best compliments that I've ever gotten were, "Oh man, I forgot you were in the room when that photo was taken," and that's the job in my estimation for what I do and what I like to do. I was with, I think it was Widespread Panic was recording at Echo Mountain Studios probably in the 2010s at some point in time for a record. And I was in the vocal booth with John Bell when he was cutting a vocal, and we weren't, but probably even closer than you and I are right now. And, I knocked on the door and said, "Hey, you mind if I come in?" He said, "Absolutely." And so, we were in close quarters, and he was emoting. He was trying to record a vocal take for a song that they were going to put on a record. And I had a camera up shooting him, as he was at the mic. And maybe 6 months later, we were working on the packaging for the album artwork or the album packaging stuff. And I shared with him this photo, and he said the same thing. He was like, "Oh man, normally in that situation, I would have felt very conscious of the fact that you're in there shooting with a fairly large lens, so meaning that it was probably pretty close, and we were in close quarters." He's like, "But looking at the image now, I remember feeling totally comfortable with the fact that you were doing that." Now, that's time, of us, he and I developing a relationship and getting comfortable with one another over several years. There's no shortcut to that, I don't think. But it's also, making people feel comfortable in your presence because you do have the camera around your neck and you're pointing the lens at them in most cases. And so I think that is one of the skills that I've learned and kind of cultivated. Mm-hmm. And it takes time. You just have to be in the room a bunch of different times with a bunch of different people to be able to make people feel comfortable.
I think as I think on experiences that I can remember from the creative perspective, mm-hmm. sharing creative space with people like that, where that can often get disrupted, it seems, is if you feel like the person in the room with you has a counter mission than what you have. And if somebody's in the room with me that's like kind of in a moment like that, especially like a recording session, if their mission were, say, to like serve their moment rather than mine, that could be almost this creative like battle for not power but for space, you know, like who's doing what creative. And it sounds like you've been able to manage to like kind of let people do their creative thing. I don't mean to like put that story in your words, but that's what I'm hearing described is like not disrupting somebody else's creative flow.
Absolutely. I mean, I think that I view my job in that situation specifically, especially in a recording studio. Look, I mean, it's expensive. There is a certain degree of pressure when you're in a studio to deliver a performance and write songs, and you're obviously trying to create a product at the end of the day such that all of this investment of time and money is going towards something. And so I'm very cognizant of that as the goal. And so when someone asks me, hey, you know, we'd love for you to come in and document this for us, you know, I always go in with the idea of they have a goal here, and I'm not going to get in the way of that goal. At the same time, they've asked me to document this, so I'm going to do it to the best of my ability, such that, you know, in the case of artists that I've never really worked with that have invited me to do that, not get in the way, you know, and to your point, kind of serve the greater goal. But, you know, with other artists, you know, the story I just told about John Bell and Widespread Panic, I've been working with them at that point in time for 4 years. And so we all knew each other pretty well. And for them to invite me into that space, again, you know, paying money to be at a beautiful studio and to work towards the making of this record, you know, always kind of keeping that in mind that, you know, it's a different thing than a live show. And the timer and the clock's ticking a little bit, and you know, to make sure that you get the shots you need and to serve the greater good without getting in the way and, you know, being a nuisance or just disrupting the vibe, you know, which that, you know, it doesn't take much. I mean, some artists are very comfortable in the studio, other artists aren't all that comfortable in the studio, and so just making sure that you're not disrupting the creative vibe that's going on, and in fact are able to document that creative vibe. And you know, that example is one that I was really proud of, because he was like, oh man, this is a great photo, and you were in really close quarters, and look at the photo you got, which is awesome. You know, Petty, I was in the studio with those guys for 2 different records, and you know, there was photos from those sessions, each one of them, that, you know, either Mike or Tom or somebody was like, oh, I forgot you were in the room. And it's like, that's the goal. You know, that's what you want to hear.
So you said that some of this takes time, and you mentioned kind of working with these guys for over a prolonged period of time. I mean, what was it? I guess, how long do you think it took you to acquire this skill compared to when you first started out and started working with musicians?
That's a good question. I think I got better. I've gotten better at it to be able to get to that point, and you learn things about, you know, an artist, either in a concert setting or a studio setting. But I think early on, I probably took longer than I needed to make sure people were comfortable, if that makes sense. Just being hyper aware of it. And maybe even just kind of saying, okay, I'm not going to push certain situations either to get into a room or to be in a space with an artist, dressing room, you know, tour bus, etc. As my career has progressed, you know, I've learned to, it still takes time, but I think I've shortened that time a little bit. And again, it's different with every artist, you know. I was just with Jason Isbell a couple weeks ago. I've known Jason like the week that he joined the Truckers. I sat and interviewed those guys. They were opening up for Leonard Skinner in Anderson, South Carolina, and he'd been in the band for like a week. And we've stayed in touch. That was 2000, I think, 2001. And, you know, photographed the band, wrote about the band while he was in the band the whole time. When he left, you know, photographed him with the 400 unit when that started. We stayed in touch for a long time and have known each other for a long time. And so when I went over there to see him over in Greensboro a couple weeks ago, that relationship is, even though we hadn't seen each other in I think 6 or 8 months, it's pretty well established at this point in time. Other artists that I've only met, the night of because they've asked me to come in and shoot, and they've opened up their dressing room to me and kind of said, "Hey, come on in." It takes a little bit more time. I mean, Billy Strings last year, I met those guys June or May of last year. I think last year I shot like maybe 14 shows with them, and did not know them at all before I showed up to start photographing them. And it takes time to build that rapport. I've gotten probably better at it and quicker at it now as I get older. But like I said, every artist is different. Going back to Jason Isbell, I shot him last spring, and Sheryl Crow was on the bill. Never met her. Jason introduced us, and for whatever reason, that time in that day, we got immediately comfortable with one another to the point where, going out of it, I was like, I'd love to come and shoot more of those shows. I mean, one, the show was fantastic. She similar to Petty, her show, when you watch it, you're like, I know that song. Oh, I know that song too. Oh, that one, and then it's just one massive hit or popular song after another for someone of my age range. It was like, I remember all of these songs. But that relationship and that kind of rapport with her, I thought moved really quickly, and we felt very comfortable around each other to the point where I was shooting photos backstage and hanging around. So again, I don't know if I answered your question, but I think that it's different with every time, with every artist, and certainly in terms of my experience and time doing it, I've gotten better at it, hopefully.
Yeah. And I think you answered the question for sure. Yeah.
Good.
So okay, so I'll kind of retell where I am with my memory with our last conversation,
Sure.
and we'll just kind of pick up from there. So I from what I understand, you moved out to the West Coast, you shot for a while.
Mm-hmm.
I think you told me you went to South by, maybe,
Yeah.
and that's where you might have
Austin City Limits.
Austin City Limits.
Yeah,
and,
down in Austin.
And that's where you met the Heartbreakers, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So, and you did tell me sort of like how you got hired, how you got the phone call and the tour invite, but I'm wondering, because you're a big Tom Petty fan, and like you told me about your dad taking you to when this record came out, like going to get it, listening to it when it came on the radio. Like, what? As cool as you are, and as cool as you want to be, and like as much as we all know, we're aware of trying to sort of take on the mentality of being comfortable around the people that we admire, kind of blending in and not outing ourselves as whatever, as not one of them.
Yeah.
But when you meet somebody that iconic, I would imagine that's a weird dance to dance. Like, what? Can you just tell me about the moment when you kind of met those guys?
Yeah, I went out for so in Austin, they were the headliner on that particular festival, and it rained right before their set, and I was in the pit with only a handful of other folks, and one of the guys in their management office saw me and was like, "Hey, come on up here," and I ended up standing on the side stage, and the whole band was standing there. Waiting to go on. And I think it was more like, "Hey, nice to meet you," kind of thing. It really wasn't like an involved introduction, really. And they were all kind of waiting to go on stage. So there was that kind of mix of anxious kind of excitement and anticipatory excitement kind of thing.
Why did you get called up?
One of the guys who works in their management company saw me, and I knew him.
Oh, you knew. Okay,
Yeah,
gotcha.
and so he was like, "Come out of the rain. You've got your cameras." And so I went and stood kind of on the side stage. And ultimately, the reason why I think that they ended up calling me several months later was I wrote them a thank you note after shooting the show and sent them a high-res image of Mike Campbell. The first song was "Listen to Our Heart." It was still kind of raining. He stepped to the lip of the stage, Rickenbacker, rain falling down on him, and it was like shooting fish in a barrel. Anyone could have gotten this shot, but I got a really good one. And ultimately, I think they really liked that photo.
Yeah.
And so fast forward 8 months or something like that, I think, 9 months maybe, and they were planning the Mojo tour and my name came up. And so they called, and I went to the West Coast and watched rehearsal. And that was unbelievable because they probably played for 3 hours, and they didn't play a single Heartbreaker song the entire time.
Huh.
And it was in a very small room, not much bigger than this. There was only a few people there, me being one of them. And it was just cool to watch these guys, who obviously I was a huge fan of. And they are massive rock stars, and had been for many years at this point in time. And to watch them kind of play Hank Williams covers and like Sonny Boy Williamson songs and Chuck Berry songs, stuff that they all grew up listening to and like enjoying, kind of the songs of their own youth. That was kind of interesting to like watch these guys who were the soundtrack to my youth playing songs that were the soundtrack and the influences of their youth. And just watching them being so happy about it. It was just like, they would literally call off a song and, hey, what about, this? Oh, how does that go? Okay, yeah, let's do it. Bang, and did it. And it was like, wow, this is fascinating. That was an unbelievable experience, and something that happened pretty much at the outset of every touring cycle that they did. Is they would start at their clubhouse, little small rehearsal and storage area, that they hung out in recording studio. And the first 2 weeks of it was a very tight group of people, and they'd come and play for 2 hours, 3 hours, and play whatever they wanted to play, and ultimately, more crew would show up, and then we'd move to a real like production studio like Sony or somewhere in Culver City, and they'd set up all the PA and the lights and it'd go into full production rehearsal. But those first couple weeks where it was like 5 or 6 people and then the band in the room and that was it, and they'd come in every day and play whatever they wanted to for the first week to kind of get warmed up and to kind of, get used to playing together again. And then they'd start to kind of play through the catalog and decide what was going to go into the show. That was always really cool to watch. Mm-hmm. And I don't think I ever asked Tom about it, but I think I had a conversation with Mike once about it where I was like, what's up with playing like all these songs for the first week? And he was like, it's kind of like we're reintroducing ourselves to each other, musically speaking. And, those guys would play a tour, and if they weren't going straight into the studio, then they wouldn't play together for months on end. Sometimes, earlier in their career, like a year would pass before they would play together again. And so I always really liked the concept of, okay, we're going to get started for this tour. The first week we're going to come in, and it's just going to be kind of a small group of people, and we're going to like get to know each other again musically over these songs that we all know and love. And I thought that was always really cool. It was like, that makes a lot of sense.
It does. Yeah, start with like a kind of kinship.
Right.
Thing,
like these are songs we all love. And in some cases with Mike and Tom and Ben and Ron Blair, songs that they all grew up in Gainesville listening to, I always thought that was really cool, and it was like, it made a lot of sense. And it was always, in terms of the time I spent with them on the tours were great, the big show and lights and tons of people and these amazing arenas and venues was always cool. But I always really looked forward to that first week because I knew everyone was just kind of getting started, and there was a lot of hanging around, a lot of eating lunch, a lot of telling jokes, and then getting up and playing, hey, we're going to do a bunch of Hank Williams today, and it was like, this is great. I feel really lucky to be here.
You remember any of those jokes?
God, I mean, those guys were so funny. Just hilarious senses of humor. They a lot of the guys in that group of crew who would be in the room at those early rehearsals have known, they'd been with the band for 30 plus years. And so it's like a constant ribbing and messing with people, like, guitar feeds back and they all of the band at the same time yells Winstead, which is Mike's guitar tech. And then, and I'd have a camera going and I'd pan to Chinner or Winstead, Steve Winstead, And he'd be like, here it goes again. Welcome to my life for the next, 8 weeks. That kind of stuff. I mean, Petty's sense of humor was just hysterical. I mean, so funny. I remember one time we were at like somewhere in Vermont or upstate New York at like a festival thing, and it was like a ski resort, and we had like, it was almost like a locker room where the production office was and where the band's dressing rooms were. It wasn't like an amazing, glamorous setup at all. And the band shows up, and I remember sitting in the production office, and I was in there by myself, just sitting on my computer editing some images, and Tom walks in, and I kind of turn around, hey, how are you? And he comes walking through, and he's just kind of looking around. And the room, I guess it was like where people changed to go ski or whatever, but it smelled like a locker room, And Tom kind of walks all the way across the room, comes right up to me, and I look up at him, and he goes, "Did someone forget to take out the garbage in here?" I mean, just like a really great sense of humor all the time, always kind of a quick wit, really funny, and kind of had a little bit of that, like, he knew probably or sensed that the day had been long for the crew and it wasn't a really nice place or an easy day. And so he knew when he was coming in, like, I gotta throw some funny at this one because this hadn't been an easy day for everybody. But this guy's really, really funny, and great memories of just kind of hanging around and listening to them tell stories. Those stories are really good.
Morale keeping often left off of the band leader job description, but
right.
like it is a big deal.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, you're the guy, right? And for you to be able to laugh at it, both at yourself and then just kind of the world in which we all existed in this little cocoon traveling around the country and the world, levity coming from him was always welcome,
it's really cool for me as somebody on the other end of that world to hear, because it's just that little story, because there's often times where I think people in my shoes will attribute their status in the world to like why shit is so hard, why situations they find themselves in might be less comfortable or whatever. But it's interesting to hear that somebody, I mean, he played the Super Bowl for God's sake, and he was a big deal.
Yeah.
And to hear that there were still times where he had to like keep everybody from feeling negatively about whatever situation y'all might have been in, like it's kind of in a weird way encouraging or something.
Well, he just cared deeply about the folks that worked with him and for him. And like I said, a lot of those folks worked with him from the very beginning. I mean, when I joined, I think the newest or the person who'd last joined before me in terms of the kind of the core crew was like 10 years prior. And I was the guy coming in brand new with the camera around his neck, which made it a little bit more challenging probably.
Yeah.
But I can't, I've said it umpteen times, I can't, that experience, what they gave me with that opportunity was incredible. I couldn't be more grateful for what they gave me, which was, we like your work. We think you're really good at it, and we want you to come and do it with us. And there was never, hey, you should do it this way, or have you ever considered this? It was always like encouragement, support, not only from the band, but the entire crew. And as they got to know me on both sides, band and crew, and management management along with it, it was like, keep doing it. You're getting better at it. Like, we'll give you more access. Like, in terms of the backline guys on stage, hey, come in my world. There's some great angles from back here, shooting back, from behind the band out into the crowd. Come stand here. And they didn't have to do that. No one had. I mean, that made their job more difficult. I was in their way. Yeah. But for them to give me, again, that opportunity, was like, oh yeah, you're right. The photos from back here are really cool, So yeah, I can't say enough about it. It was a total dream gig, and like what you said earlier, I mean, I was a massive fan as a kid. I mean, from Florida, grew up listening to that music, those records, were in my parents' record collection when I was a kid, sitting on the the living room floor flipping through the records. They were prominently there. I remember when Full Moon Fever came out. I remember exactly where I was when we got the cassette tape. I remember sitting in the driveway with my dad, listening to it, and him being like, "Oh no, we gotta wait and listen to the whole first side." I remember all of that.
That's exactly what I was about to ask you. When did you call your dad and tell him you got this job?
Well, it's interesting. So my dad passed away before I got the gig. In fact, my dad passed away the year that I met them, probably 3 months beforehand.
Wow.
Yeah. So he never got to see that. I mean, I assume he saw it, but he never went to a show. My brothers did. Everyone else in my family, I think, went. But he never saw it, which is a bummer, for sure. But I mean, it would have flipped his wig. I mean, he would have just completely freaked out, But 3 months prior, he passed away in July, and I met those guys in 2007, and I met those guys in October.
Man, yeah, I'm sorry to hear that, but and wow, that is such a bummer. That's such a bummer. But as you say, you hope there's still some kind of interesting gravity about that, and I imagine trying to stand in your shoes, that seems trippy as hell to experience like a loss like that, and then this, like, get to live this thing that you and him were bonded over.
Yeah, no, you're exactly right. And I thought about that a fair amount, how close those things happen. And it's happened to me in several different times in my life where, like, something ended and then very quickly something began right after it. It was almost like a door shut and then a door opened. And that happened with the passing of my father and then meeting the Heartbreakers. And then that relationship went, almost a decade. And Tom passed away and the Ramkat opened 6 months later.
Damn. That's wild.
And so there is a lot of that I can point to throughout my life where something happened and either a door shut or an era ended, and then something else happened and a door opened, and something else started.
Okay, so what we're gonna do is we're gonna talk about that era ending, the second era. But before I do that,
sure.
This opportunity, the Heartbreak, it ended up turning into, now you've had this wide-reaching portfolio of artists you've worked with. I mean, maybe you can go through a little bit of the list of artists you've actually worked with, and you can tell me a bit about how working with Tom Petty led to all of that stuff.
Yeah. So the Heartbreakers was the one I worked with the longest. A couple years after working with the Heartbreakers, though I knew them well before that, was Widespread Panic. Mm-hmm. I was on the road with them for officially, I think, 5 years. Still really good friends with them, stay in touch. Had shot them prior to the time when I started being employed by them, when I was working for music magazines and just shooting them, and was a fan of their stuff. In terms of touring work, Leon Bridges did that one for a year or so, which was a phenomenal experience. An otherworldly talented guy, younger than anybody else I'd worked with to that point in time. And was an incredible. I mean, I love all of those guys. Still stay in touch with all of them, and just had a blast working with them. And then there's been people like the Truckers, Drive-By Truckers, who I don't think I've ever toured with necessarily, although I think they opened some shows with Petty when I was out with Petty. But I've shot a bunch of album stuff for them. Shot them live on stage, I don't know how many times. I think their current press photo is one of mine. Patterson's current press photos are mine. So I've worked with them a ton, both in the live setting. Have I been in the studio with them? I don't think I've ever been in the studio with those guys. But have worked with them a ton. Similarly, haven't toured with Band of Horses, but have worked with them a fair amount. Billy String's the most recent artist that I've been doing some work with out on the road. Haven't been in the studio with him, but mainly the live stuff, shooting some of that, and that's been fantastic. gosh. And then there's been like kind of like small one-off stuff. Like I've done Steve Winwood opened 2 of the tours that I did with Petty a couple years apart. Got to be really good friends with Steve, his team, his band, the crew. And so I went out and did some shows with him, which was fantastic. I can't say enough nice things about Steve, his whole team. I mean, he's incredible. I mean, similar to Petty, I've been a massive fan of Steve Winwood's for Traffic, Blind Faith, all the solo stuff in the 80s. And to get a chance to meet him later in his life and watch him work, rehearse, perform, he is an otherworldly talent and just one of the nicest people in the world. And that's been a huge gift. I'm trying to think who else. I mean, a lot of the openers that I worked with that opened for the Heartbreakers, I went on and shot photos for them, at a variety of different shows. ZZ Top, I did some stuff with CSN, Crosby, Stills, and Nash. I think My Morning Jacket opened one of those tours. I've gone on and done a bunch of work with them. So yeah, it's been I've been really lucky in that I've gotten to work with some folks, not only that I consider that are older than me, that I consider heroes, but also get a chance to build relationships with folks who are more contemporary and like my peers a little bit more.
Yeah.
And that's been really phenomenal. I've been, in an industry that sometimes gets, painted with, there's a bunch of jerks in the music business. I've had kind of the exact opposite experience in that I've been really lucky to work with some amazing people, not only the artists, but the people that surround them in terms of their support network or crews or management, and just consider myself lucky the opportunities that I've gotten.
Absolutely, man.
Yeah.
Are you ever, when you worked with some of these folks across time, especially more recently, have you ever thought about dipping your toe back into the writing element, or is it just, are you happy with staying in the photography realm?
Yeah, I mean, with Petty and Panic, they all knew that I wrote too, and so after like the first tours, they were like, "What about writing like a little recap of each show, like including the set list, and then writing kind of like a little recap, whether that's focused solely on the concert or like the venue that they're playing in, if it's an iconic place, or the city and why it's important to the band that to come back to X, Y, and Z city." And so they slowly kind of pulled me in to like not just do the photos and the video, but also like, hey, write this recap. And so I did that a lot. And I guess the year after Tom died, we did with the estate a print shop, 5 images. They were like lithographs and then fine art prints. And, myself and Dana Petty kind of, I put the images forth. She said, "Yeah, I love these. What have you ever considered this one?" And so we kind of came to a collective decision on these 5 images and released them as the Andy Tennille collection. And as a part of that, I think the back and forth on the email with Dana, I like wrote these like little paragraphs about each of the different images, and whether it was like, again, the venue, or in one case, like the suit. I told this story about the suit that Tom was wearing in the photo, and I'm happy to retell it. It was at Royal Albert Hall in London, and it was the first time the band had been back in Europe in like 25 years. And you're at Albert Hall. Like I've listened to live records from there since I was a little kid, and I knew, in hanging out with the band on the U.S. tour leading up to that European tour, that like everyone was really jazzed to go and get to play Royal Albert Hall, and so the day of the show, I knew the band was going to arrive at 5, let's say, and so I went down to the loading dock down below Royal Albert Hall to meet them, right when they got to the building. And when I got down there, I discovered there was this really cool mural of artists that had played Royal Albert Hall painted in this like catacombs underneath the venue. And I was like, oh, that's really cool. Maybe I can get a picture of Tom in front of the mural. And so they arrive, he and Dana and their security guy arrive, And they got out of the car, and I said, hey, and we got some photos in front of the mural. And then Tom turned to Dana and said, hey, do you have the suit bag? And quickly, his security guy, Dean, said, no, I've got it. And he's holding the suit bag. And at that point in time, I was like, and I never heard Tom at that point, like, I don't think I ever heard him other than that instance say anything about like what he was going to be wearing on stage that night. And so I knew whatever was in that suit bag was important to him for whatever reason. And so I was like, I kind of made a mental note of it, like, he must really like what's in the suit bag. And I came to find out that he'd gotten a really nice suit custom done. And fast forward a couple hours, they go on stage. I can't remember what the opening, it might have been Listen to Our Heart on that tour too, but opening song, Lights Go Up. And I hadn't seen him, I don't think, backstage right before the show. So I did, but he wasn't in the suit. He literally put on the suit like maybe 10 minutes before he went on stage. So the lights go up, crowd just goes nuts. And there's Tom in this like black pinstripe, yellow pinstripe suit. I mean, it was so cool looking. And I got this great shot of him. The first guitar break, he stepped from behind the mic, and he like saw the crowd, and he's in this room that means the world to him. You know, he'd been there for George Harrison's memorial concert a couple of years prior. And this grin goes across his face, and I got this great shot. And that was one of the images we put in this limited release collection thing. And I wrote that story to his wife, Dana. And she came back and was like, this one has to be in, and you've got to include these stories when we announce this, when we start releasing the images. And I was like, okay. And as I was working with the management folks, they all responded very positively to the story too. And we're like, can you come up with stories for the other 4 images? And I was like, oh God, this can be kind of tough, because this one was really easy to come up with. I mean, I remember it like it was yesterday.
Yeah.
But I did. And so we released kind of a little story with each of the images. And I share all of that to say that was really fun to do. And the feedback we got in terms of people commenting on social media or emailing their website or emailing me was like, man, you need to put out a book, because if this is just 5 images and the associated stories, you should put out a book and do a story next to each image, because this is awesome. And so I know kind of in the back of my head that I want to scratch that itch again one day. Whatever form that takes, I don't really know what that's going to be. But I do love writing, and I'll get back to it at some point in time. It was my first love, and I love doing it. And people talk about like the anxiety of the empty page. But I just look at it as an opportunity. It's like you got a whole 8.5 by 11 inch sheet here to fill up. So fill it up, Yeah. Whereas other people are like, intimidated by like sitting down and writing. I see it as an opportunity, and it's like, let's go.
Yeah.
I want to get back to it. And I've tried in various ways to get back to it, whether that's, writing and directing music videos, what I just described. I'm working on a documentary right now that's that also kind of scratches a little bit of that itch. One day soon.
I am trying to honor your own flow by not prying too much, but you're making me so curious. But I trust what you're saying. I look forward to whatever what that ferments into.
Yeah, I do too. I miss it.
I will just ask real quickly, when you say work on a documentary, are you talking about your own, or you work collaborating with one?
We're about 1.5 years into a documentary about the Horde tour, which went from 1992 to 1998. I'm working on it with 2 guys who are School of the Arts graduates. They approached me in 2021, asked me to kind of help them write a treatment, because they knew that I knew about that era of musicians and that genre. And I, at that time, was working for Widespread Panic, and they were like, well, they were one of the bands. And so I helped them work on a kind of a treatment and kicked it back over to them. And a couple months later, they came to town and said, we think you should be the person to direct this. And I told them, said I've never, I've directed music videos, and I've shot my own stuff backstage as a fly on the wall. I've never done anything like this. And they were like, we get it. We're going to surround you with the team. We're experienced at this. They do a lot of television production and feature length narrative stuff as well. Like they were part of that kind of scene around Danny McBride at the School of the Arts. And so they worked on Foot Fist Way. They also now do a lot of like that television show Alone.
Okay.
Where they send people out in the wilderness and it's like a game show almost, or a survival test rather. They were heavily involved in the launch of that, a bunch of other shows on Discovery and Netflix and stuff like that. At any rate, we've been working on it for about a year and a half. We hope to have a cut in August, and then we're going to submit it to film festivals and try and make the film festival run probably January to May of next year.
I have one last question about Tom, but
sure.
Since we're on this, I'm gonna follow this really quickly.
Yeah.
I've known you for I've known you for a couple of years now.
Yeah.
And it's like I kind of knew of you before I knew you, and since I've gotten to know you, it's like I'm constantly surprised by what you're doing. Like you're not the kind of guy that's constantly being like, look at all the cool shit I have done or am doing, but you've got all this stuff kind of in you, in your soul. Like, what is that? Like, why? Like, I guess I kind of want to hear about your perspective in terms of how you plug in creatively to the larger world, and like, I guess I'm just going to ask you point blank, what inspires you to live this life where maybe in your immediate surroundings, like that isn't really pushed on other people. You don't really force other people to know that about you.
Yeah. I don't know. I mean, I'm of the mind, like I wake up every morning and I'm like, hey, I got another shot at this thing, so let's make the best and most of this day. And I try and remind myself every day that like it can all get taken away. I've lost loved ones throughout my life, lost really close friends, mentors, etc. And just realize, make the most of every day. Be grateful, grateful for the opportunity, grateful that you wake up and you're breathing and you get another shot at it. And just like maximize the opportunity. It's something I tell my kids all the time too. Like, hey, this is a gift. Like every opportunity you get, whether it's, an opportunity to sit down and learn something new in school, or to go and play a soccer game, or to just wake up and be living, it's a gift. So like chase it and maximize it and work hard and enjoy it too. That's part of it as well. Do the things you love. It's the old, like, if you do stuff you love, it's never work, right? I've done stuff that I didn't love and realized very quickly that I'm not good at that. I can't fake it at all.
Yeah.
I've done it. I've done it for money. I've done it because I had to. I've done it because I thought it was what I was supposed to do, based on societal norms or expectations. And it was like, life's too short. And I've seen life get cut short with people throughout my life, family, friends, etc. And it's like, if you go out and you live it like you only got one shot at it and this is the only day you got left, or that there's not going to be any more, leave it all out on leave it on the field, as they say in sports. Like, just put as much effort into it as you can, because if you don't wake up tomorrow, I hate to sound like a downer, but at least then you can, know that you tried hard,
I mean, you don't sound like a dad like that. A lot of people say what you're saying.
Sure.
And I think I don't often, sometimes when I hear people say something to that effect, I don't feel gravity with it. I don't feel like pulled by it.
Sure.
But there are some people who really mean it. And I take it from the fruits of your labor that you really do mean it, that you really do manage to think about that. And I've heard other people talk and really mean that. And I think it's a skill almost.
Yeah.
Some people don't do that.
Yeah, I think so. I think it is a skill, and it's something I got to remind myself, just like anything, just be grateful, like you're standing in a room watching, the story I just told you about, listening to Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers play for 3 hours. I'm one of 5 people in the room. And man, how lucky am I? I mean, constantly through that experience, as it relates to my dad, I was constantly going, man, if he were standing here right now, he'd be losing his mind.
Yeah.
And so that was an easy way to remind myself about how grateful I should be, because it was a tangible, thing of someone who I knew who introduced me to this music, and how he'd be just like, what? Where are you right now? And again, like, life's short, I mean, it's really short. And if you're not doing stuff that motivates you, that you love, that is important to you, that inspires you, I don't know, like, that's the stuff I want to be doing, and whether that's taking photos of an artist, making a documentary film, something I've never done before that makes me hugely nervous, but it at the same time really excites me, or being part of a team that has a venue that, we get to put on live concerts like 3 or 4 times a week. I mean, if you would have told me, I was telling this someone the other day, if you would have told the 20-year-old or 18-year-old Andy Tennille, like, hey, one day you're going to have this music venue and some guy, someone's going to stand on stage and say that it's one of the best music venues in the Carolinas, how would that sit with you? I mean, 18-year-old Andy would flip out at that, and that isn't to say that it hasn't been difficult or...
Thanks for that. He's in the middle of his sentence.
It's okay. It's doesn't come without its challenges, for sure, but at the same time, it's like, man, what a great opportunity.
Yeah.
I couldn't be luckier. I'm the luckiest guy in the world.
Gratitude seems to be
gotta be grateful.
Hugely important to that mentality.
Yes. I try and practice gratitude and remind myself about being grateful, for a variety of reasons all of the time. I mean, like I said, life is very, very short. And be grateful for the opportunity that is given to you, and just be grateful that you wake up and you get another crack at it every single day.
Well, sorry, I can't. Sorry, she's
You're good.
She's woken up. Anyway,
Yeah.
I ask about that because that's probably something I've identified that I don't always know how to tap into. And so I love hearing other people talk about the mentalities that bring about the fruits that you mean to bring about, because that's really what it's all about, I guess, is being able to look at your life and be like, I did what I hoped to do with it, or I am doing what I am trying to do with it, instead of this victimhood of bitterness or whatever, this victimhood of unhappiness. Like, navigating around that is pretty important, it seems. So it's awesome to hear about that.
Absolutely.
So I gotta ask this last question about Tom Petty. I was talking with someone. I wish I could remember who. It may have been Jeffrey Dean Foster. Not exactly sure who. But it was about sort of this Tom. Like, I'm fascinated with the idea of persona, when people use it, when they don't. Like, the idea that the artist is a regular person versus they're this trickster. They're this like symbol of a person or whatever. Tom Petty, I believe, is perceived as kind of acting like himself a lot of the time, but yet had this sort of person he could be in music videos and stuff too. I'm wondering, like, behind the scenes or like in his creative space, like as you were fortunate to be able to kind of witness, if you ever got any kind of indication of who he was and what his relationship was with like his persona out there in the world versus like who he was.
He, like I said, wicked sense of humor, really funny, liked to kind of keep, at least from my experiences with him, especially doing the touring and music side, had a fairly close-knit group of people around him, whether they worked, for him and with him on those tours, or just even his kind of friends network was pretty tight. In terms of kind of his, the songs and the persona, I mean, a lot of people talk about Tom's songs kind of embodying the everyman, that they were very accessible, to listeners. You could kind of the imagery that he used wasn't like overtly complex. It was something that many people could tie into and understand, and the emotions that he wrote about. They're common emotions, and common experiences. And so, from that perspective, I think that's why his music and his songs were so wildly popular, is that everyone had an avenue into them. They'd all been, in love and then out of love, and so from that perspective, in terms of the persona, his fans, I should tell a quick story. My first tour, the third show I did with them was at the Gorge outside of in George, Washington. And my first tour with the band, I was like, I'm kind of curious as to like what a Heartbreakers fan is. And so I went and stood at the front gate with a video camera and filmed 3 hours from the day or the moment the gates opened, 3 hours in, and just watched and sat there. And I ended up doing like a time lapse with it or something. I used it for something, but it was really instructive in that his fan base was really wide. I mean, you kind of had like hippies, you had bikers, you had what appeared to be kind of like kind of yuppie businessmen types. You had old people, you had young people, you had, people of all different colors and sizes. It was really it was instructive to me and really interesting to me that all of these people were fans of his and were fans of his music. And I guess that's a testament to the fact that he did kind of take the everyman approach to his songwriting. He allowed he gave people avenues into it through kind of writing about common experience that enabled or just kind of brought people in, welcomed them in. And then just as a person, getting to know the guy, really funny, really warm. That group of people, they're, as I said before, super supportive of me and encouraging, and that to me was, I was like, okay, yeah, this is great. He would come to me and say, because I'd send out a link to the band, with photos from the night before, and he'd come over and sit down and talk to me about the images, and not necessarily instruction or anything like that, but like, I really liked this one, and like we'd scroll through the images, and I really liked that one. The other thing that we connected on was like record stores. Like on days off, I'd go to record stores and go and get vinyl. And I had a little portable turntable on my in my road case. And so the next day when the band showed up for the show, he'd come over and find me and be like, "What'd you get yesterday?" Because he knew I went to the record store. And he didn't get to go out at that point in time much outside of his hotel, not a ton. In some cities he could, but a lot of cities he couldn't, and so in a way, I think he was kind of not living vicariously through me, but at least he couldn't go to the record store, and he was interested to see what I would pick up. And we spent a lot of time listening to albums together at my road case, because he'd sit there and flip through and he'd be like, "Oh wow, this Little Feat from Santa Monica Civic Center." Oh man, I remember this show. And he'd put it on, listen, and we'd just sit there and listen to it, or he'd pull up a chair, and I'd be out in the hallway outside their dressing rooms, and he'd sit there and listen to the record with me. And there's so many instances where we'd sit there and talk about something, and he'd say, "Oh, next record store, you should go look for this record." And then he'd be so jazzed if, I'd come in the following day and the record would be there, and he'd be like, "Oh, you went and tell me about the record store. Like, what else did they have?" It was conversations like that where that was kind of the foundation of our relationship in a lot of ways was, I was photographing the band and documenting them on these tours and in the studio, but it was one way that we really connected outside of my job. It was like, we're both music fans, and he loved that I took the time to carry a turntable around with me, and I'd figured out like the best one you could get that was the smallest form factor, and how I wired up the speakers. He thought that was hilarious, and that I had this road case that one section of it was like all vinyl, and this turntable, he thought that was hilarious. And, and it's just like, those are the memories that I remember most. Like I remember all the stage stuff, but those conversations where it was like, hey, go grab your turntable and let me see what else you got, and we'd sit there and he'd flip through the records and, oh, okay, let's listen to this J.J. Cale record, and let me tell you this story about first time I met J.J. Cale. Yeah. That kind of stuff was like, I'll never forget that.
Well, that's like the real him,
Right.
And that's a side of him that when I hear that, what I think of is like, everybody else in the world, for the most part, the vast, vast, vast majority of people in the world think of Tom Petty as what he like put into the world, you know, what he contributed to the zeitgeist or whatever. And then, but being able to experience him on the level of what he loved taking in from the world, that's a whole different person, probably.
Totally. And like big Lakers fan. So anytime there's basketball on and we were out on tour, invariably, they'd go to the promoter and be like, we just need a TV and make sure the Lakers game's on when he gets here. And I mean, I can't tell you how many times walking into his dressing room and the Lakers are on, he'd be like, sit down. Like, we're watching the Lakers game, and be like, okay. And I'm a big basketball fan, so I loved it. I'm not necessarily a Lakers fan, but he was. And so doing that, we did that a lot. When we were on tour, which wasn't all that regularly during the NFL season, we used to do like an NFL pick'em thing where all the crew and the band got into it and found out about it, and we're like, oh man, we want in on this. And he got into that. On the last tour, he took a moment when he introduced the band, as he was making the introducing each of the guys, and then he would get to Mike Campbell. And he told this story about meeting Mike, and how Mike had this like cheap Japanese guitar. And it was one of those things where the story at the beginning of the tour was like 90 seconds. And by the end of the tour, it was like a 7-minute thing that he like would build on each night. It was like, what is that joke? That's that famous joke that they did a doc about many years ago. And each person keeps, it's like a game of telephone almost. They keep adding to the story and adding to the story. Mm. That's kind of what he did through the course of 40 some odd shows. Was he would keep adding to the story, and there'd be another detail each night about like, this guitar, or how he met Mike, or the people who were in the room when he met Mike. And so the crew, about halfway through the tour, we started betting. We created a pool, and we would bet on what Tom would say the cost of Mike's cheap Japanese guitar was. And so it started going on like that. Now everyone on the crew was in on it. And so when you would get to that point in the story, in the middle of the show, everyone would be like, okay, what's he gonna say? What's he gonna say? What's he gonna say? And he'd say it, and someone would win, and all the rest of us would be like, oh. And even you would see on the back line behind Tom, all the crew guys like kind of peeking out, and then he'd tell it, and they'd all look at each other and stuff. And it was hilarious. Well, the best part about it was Tom got wind of it, and someone told him that that's what we were doing. And so then he would like play it up. He would like get to that point in the story, and he'd add some more detail, and he knew that everyone was sitting around the stage like waiting for him to say, and the guitar was actually $2.50, or whatever it was. It started at like $100, and it went cheaper and cheaper and then we got to the Hollywood Bowl, and he was like, this guitar was barely 99 cents. And like the whole place is, everyone, 60 some odd person crew would be standing around at wherever their job was, but also around the stage, just waiting on him to tell the story. And my friend Greg Looper, who was Tom's longtime monitor engineer, passed away during COVID. I tried to convince him to cut out the story from each of the shows and make like a mix of like all of them, all 47 versions of the story, because it was so funny that like a story that literally started at like 90 seconds, a minute and a half, grew to like 7 minutes of him like expounding. And it's his sense of humor. It's him as a showman, and just, it's just so funny.
That's so great.
Yeah, and the fact that he found out that we were betting on it and was trying to like mess with us was just hilarious.
That's so great.
Yeah. And he never acknowledged it. Mike told us, like, or someone did, Ben Mott, because then the band started betting on it too. They found out about the pool and they're like, oh, we're in on it. And we were like, you can't bet on it because you guys could tell him to say a certain thing and then you win. And they were like, we'll never do that, and so he never overtly acknowledged that he knew, but he absolutely knew. Mm-hmm. And I never asked him, like when we were sitting in his dressing room, by ourselves, I never was like, all right, like, do you know what's going on? Because it was too good. I didn't want to mess it up, like, it was going very nicely on its own, like the progression of this thing that was happening that all of the entire tour was participating in. And at the end, even he was participating in. And just how funny it was. It was one of those things that when you're on tour, these little jokes, that are, a few people, start, and it grows and grows and grows over the course of this little small traveling cocoon of a community. It becomes the thing that you look forward to every night, and it's so nonsensical and kind of weird, but it's hilarious at the same time.
I love it.
Yeah,
it's such a thing that people who have lived on the road for a while can understand. You know, like there's little moments to. You're still doing the thing. You're still doing your show, but these moments that amuse you on the inside keep you going. Kind of a little bit.
Yeah, it reminds me that thinking about that reminds me that I need to get in touch with some of those guys and see if they'll put together some sort of compilation of all the stories, because by the end of it, it was just like all the level of detail was hilarious. It was like these little small, and every night he would add one more, and then the next night it would be a different thing. And the price always changed on the guitar, but he would add another detail about Mike was wearing a flowery shirt, the first night I met him, or there was a guy named Snake in the room, and it was just like, okay, and it would just keep getting added to, and you're like, okay, he's doing something here that is so funny. And obviously, you're not playing from the same audience every night, so they never saw the progression of it necessarily. Some of those fans or diehards would see, 5 or 6 shows a tour, and they would catch on like, oh man, he's really adding to the story every night. And like all of us were like, it gets better and better. It's what we look forward to every night, was like this yarn that he was spinning that was like just hysterical.
That's
so
great.
Funny. Good memories.
Man, so okay. I think that's a good opportunity for me to switch,
sure,
especially so I don't overindulge in your time.
Yeah,
Marble, what you doing, kid? Hey, kid. Okay, so one of the questions. This might be a good segue question into talking about the Ramkat, which is, I was thinking earlier, about what we might talk about. Is it weird to have this identity as this person who's an artist? I think in our community, you're not only viewed as an artist, you're viewed also as this person who's like, he's connected to my opportunity as an artist. And honestly, that's how you and I met, and probably how a lot of the musicians here in town is like, you're a person they reach out to, like, can you give me an opportunity to play music or whatever? Is that at all a conflict of identity? Is that weird to be both of those things?
No. Well, I guess one thing is, the first, 9 years that I lived in Winston, I was not here, half the year pretty much. I was on the road. And so I didn't, I'd come into town for a couple weeks at a time and maybe catch a show at the garage every once in a while, because Richard and I were friends. And so I'd try and get over there as much as I could, but I wouldn't really, like my business partner and one of my best friends, Brian Ledbetter, we didn't meet until 2017. And I knew about Camel City and knew about Airtype and knew about Brian and his story, but we had never crossed paths. And he would say the same thing about me. I'd heard about you, but you were never here. You were never in town.
Yeah.
And when I was with family and raising kids and, trying to be present for that. And then when that changed, and I was going to be in town more, the opportunity with the Ramkat came to pass, and it was like, wow, this is something where I can still be involved in music, which is my passion, but do it on a local level, and partner with somebody in Richard Emmett, who I not only was good friends with, but had a great deal of respect for.
Yeah. This might be a better way to ask what I was trying to ask. Is Andy the creator a different dude or a different kind of way to function than Andy the curator of the local music scene? Like, are those two guys kind of the same?
Yeah.
Or different?
I think they're probably the same.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's just a different hat and a different expression of that creativity, probably. The Crossroads series at Sika, which we did for 11 years, that was a really good training ground in terms of curating and kind of curating a concert series, a concert experience. I learned a lot of lessons there that were brought to bear on the Ramkat, and I think that the Ramkat really is like a strange kind of combination of three people's vision, really. I mean, Richard and I and Led, Led did a lot of the visual branding for it. Also did a lot of just early on before we opened, kind of thinking through what the experience was going to be like in the room, what we wanted, how we wanted people to feel, the aesthetics of the room itself. He had a huge part in that. And he has a voice in the booking stuff too, increasingly. I mean, early on, it was largely Richard and I, but as we've gone on, we've really leaned into Led too and said, hey, like, you're a part of this. We'd love to, have your input on it. And so his voice, as far as the curatorial aspects of the room, has gotten bigger and bigger and much appreciated on my end. I mean, as I've said, for not only the Ramkat, but for anything that I get involved with, like, best idea in the room wins, period. And it doesn't have to come from me. It doesn't have to come from Richard, me, or Led. It could come from someone who we work with. We talk about potential bookings or artists with all of our staff all the time, and they're constantly bringing ideas.
Marble, are you kidding? Oh my God.
It's all right.
She's never
like,
chooses
squeaky toy. She's like, I want the squeaky toy now that you guys are recording.
of all. Like, she never chooses the squeaky toy. Marble, what the hell, man?
It's like when friends of ours come over to the house and my kids start acting weird. I'm like, what's going on over there?
Yeah.
Now she's like, nah, I'm good. Yeah, right.
And it is, I mean, I took her on a walk earlier, but she has a lot of puppy energy.
Yeah, so absolutely.
She needs some more exercise for today.
Yeah. I mean, we're really lucky in that the folks, not only are the three partners, but also everyone in the room, they've got opinions, and we tell them, hey, give it to us. Like, if you don't like something that we've done, tell us. If you really like something we've done, tell us. If there's something we're missing, tell us. If you hear about a band and you want to try and get them in the room, let us know. Everyone in there is either a musician, and they're all music fans. Otherwise, they wouldn't be working there. And so we very much have an open door policy as that is concerned. And like I said, best idea in the room wins every time.
Yeah.
Every time.
Well, so Ramkat is reaching a milestone this year.
5 years.
5 years this March, right?
Yeah, 5 years, first week in March. It's
so
wild.
How does that feel?
It's unbelievable. 5 years is a long time to do anything, right? So that in and of itself is an accomplishment. The fact that a global pandemic happened in the middle of that and we're still here is an accomplishment that I feel really proud about. I think someone told us early on, like, if you can make it 1 year, then you can make it 5 years. And if you can make it 5 years, you can probably make it 10 years. And so that feels true, especially given the experience we had with the pandemic. I think that made us stronger. I think it made us appreciate what it is the Ramkat does and its role in the community even more. We're getting to the point now where people are calling and saying, hey, I want to come and play there. And they're fairly large artists who have heard about the room.
Yeah.
And so that's exciting. Reputation is growing, The business itself is we've learned so much in the business itself. What are you doing? You're like, I'm going to get your attention whether you like it or not, y'all.
I can't believe it. Oh my God, she's acting like a 2-year-old.
Right. She's like, oh, you don't want to pay attention to me? That's fine. I will make you pay attention to me.
What are you doing? What are you doing?
She's got the the zoomies.
Hey, girl. I wish her dog friend was here. I'd let her go play with her. But
Right.
Marble, come here.
Yeah, I mean,
I am sorry your concentration keeps getting interrupted.
You're fine.
You're a
fine.
dog person, so
I
you know
am
how it goes.
totally understanding of it. Just totally grateful. 5 years is a long time to do anything.
Yeah.
Grateful for the community support now and through really tough times. Grateful for our music community, the musicians we work with locally, regionally. Grateful that the reputation is expanding, that the Ramkat family is growing in that way. So grateful for our team. We got an amazing team of folks that we work with. I'm really proud of the folks we work with. I care about, they're part of my family, and so grateful for Richard. I mean, to be what an incredible partner to have. Can't say enough about that relationship, our friendship. It's pretty cool. 5 years is a long time to do this, and I look back on all of it, and I'm really proud of what we've accomplished so far.
What are some of the moments over the last 5 years that maybe stand out most for you? Some of the nights, or some of the guests, or whatever.
Yeah, I remember the first night. Like it was yesterday, nervousness and anxiety. I mean, the room was literally getting put together that afternoon. Everything about it, the bars, the art, the everything was like coming together to like race to get to 7:00. And then we were going to like fling open the doors and open and go. And that was nerve wracking. But I look back on it and I just kind of laugh. So I remember that night distinctly. I remember holding the curtain for Lucinda Williams when she walked off the stage. And I've known Lou for a long time. I presented her at Sika. She opened the last Petty shows, in fact, at the Hollywood Bowl. And she and Tom had a really great relationship. And I remember holding the curtain for her when she walked off the stage after her set before her encore, and she gave me a huge hug and was like, this room's amazing, and for her to say that, given our relationship, and not only that, Tom had passed away just a year, I think, before, was really special. It was like, okay, like we're on to something here. So many nights that I can think of in there, and then on the flip side of it, like, closing the room down when the pandemic happened. I remember that night pretty specifically and distinctly. The Home Sweet Home series is an experience that I'll look back on and always remember, because that was, in large part, you talked about kind of like what my identity is in the community. That was largely how I like dug in with the local music community in a lot of ways. We'd been putting local bands on the stage, but here's an opportunity to see 50 different artists over the course of a year and really get to watch them perform and then edit the whole thing, which, as you know, takes a lot of time. So you're spending a lot of time watching someone, perform and listen to their music. It was really instructive to get to see that. And that's an experience that I'll look back on and always kind of remember. The sellouts and the big nights are great, and you remember those because they're, intense, I guess, in a lot of ways, a lot of people, but gosh, we've had, some of my musical heroes in the room. Buddy Guy played that stage. Like, that's wild to me. In a week we have Los Lobos, one of my favorite bands of all time, playing in there. That's going to be incredible. So there's so many highlights and just so many faces. I was talking with someone last night. One of our former bartenders came in the room to watch the show last night, and she was like, all these new faces who work here now. And I was like, yeah, I kind of looked around the room and I was like, the only bartender who's here tonight that was here on opening night is Ben, standing over there, and so we've had change and turnover in staff, and the new faces and the new people have brought new energy into the room and new ideas. Yeah. And I think that's kind of the lifeblood of a place like the Ramkat in a lot of ways. It's been an amazing ride. Yeah, it really has. And I hope that adage of, if you can last 1 year, you'll last 5. If you can last 5, you'll last 10. If you can last 10, you'll be there for a long time. I hope that plays out because I think we're getting stronger. We're getting better at the business. We're making more contacts, and our network is expanding. And the momentum is palpable from my perspective, and from the people inside the building. And that's exciting, I'm once again, grateful for the opportunity that it's presented, not without its challenges, certainly. Grateful for the people we work with. We've got an amazing team of folks who all care about that place and care what happens in that place. And I hope that everyone hangs around. I hope that we all get to see this thing all the way through because it's been a lot of fun. Yeah. Yeah. It's been a lot of fun.
Hell yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Over the last 5 years, first, yes to all that. And it is, it must be some sort of sigh of relief, I would imagine, getting past the 2-year mark when so many people, will fail, or at a business will kind of reach its end. Marble, chill, lay down. When a business is tested, for the first 2 years.
Sure.
And not to mention the COVID thing. The COVID thing for our industry was, no joke.
Decimating.
It was decimating. It put everything in a freezer. Mm-hmm. And to see you guys, just from a perspective that doesn't really know all the ins and outs, but it looks like you guys have really found your footing with bouncing back and bringing some shows with some real pull and some, big names, and just shows that people are excited about. Like, it seems like you've kind of come back. I was talking to somebody. It feels like a lot of the arts industry has finally truly started to sort of come back with a vengeance, the way that I think people hoped it would, like a year or more ago.
I think I think you're exactly right, and I think that's a byproduct of going through a time in which we didn't have any of that, and realizing how important it is to people. Yeah. Whether you are an ardent live music guy or gal who goes to 5 shows a week or whatever, or if you do it once a year. I think that experience made people realize, wow, I really missed that, and that's important to me in my life. And so when it came back, it was like, okay, I need to go out and support this. I need to go and participate at one, because I missed it. And I realize how important it is in my life. And 2, I need to support both the artists and the places that do this, because they just went through a really trying time. Yeah. So I think that I agree with you. I think that we certainly came out of the pandemic with intent, and with specific thoughts and strategies as to how do we get better at this, and what are the things that we already do well, and how can we continue to grow and evolve the team that we have in place to take ownership of some of that stuff too, because it can't just be me and Richard or me and Richard and Led. It has to be everyone on the team feels like they have an ownership stake in this thing.
Yeah.
And so that was a big, at least from my perspective, kind of thought coming out of the pandemic was, this is important, not only to me, but to this community. It's important to this team. And if it isn't important to this team, then we need to make sure that it is, And so, the pandemic, there's a saying, and I forget who said it. It's like a British philosopher, and I forgot his name. I'll butcher it. Maybe it's like Ben Jonson or something like that. But the saying is, hanging concentrates the mind wonderfully. and that experience, sitting there kind of hanging in this abyss of like darkness and really like sad and stressful thoughts, made me think a lot about that, and make me think a lot about, okay, we've done this for 2 years, we've learned a lot, what would we do differently if we have the opportunity to reopen? What would we do differently? How could we improve upon it? And so we spent a lot of time, or I know I did. And then, sitting with Richard as we started to kind of inch closer to, okay, are we going to be able to reopen? How are we going to be able to reopen? We had long discussions about that, like, if we're going to do this, when we get this opportunity to reopen, what would we do differently? And that, with the pandemic specifically, not only was it, you got closed, but then when we did reopen, it was limited. And then we ourselves made the choice to limit that even further in some ways by making some requirements for people who came in, which did not, some people, people supported it, some people didn't. And that was difficult because it was like, we're trying to get reopened after all of this time, and we're doing what we think is the right thing to do. And people are, not supportive and in fact, openly upset about this on the internet, and in our email inbox or in our voicemail, and hey, that was the choices we made, that was somewhat self-inflicted, but at the end of the day, now looking back on that experience and those choices, I wouldn't have done it any differently. It was hard, but I think it probably made us stronger in a lot of ways. The team supported it completely. I mean, we took it to our team and said, listen, this is what we think, and this is how we're going to operate, at this point in time, and we don't know when that's going to change. But if y'all are on board with it, then let's do it. And everyone on the team was, we think that's the right decision. That's the right way to go. Mm-hmm. And again, ultimately, now looking back and, having the benefit of celebrating this landmark in a week or two, it's like, I think it made us a stronger business. I think it made us a stronger team. And it's certainly something that I look back on now, 5 years, with celebrating the 5-year anniversary. And it's like, that's a big part of that story. Those 5 years is this pandemic, the going into it, the coming out of it, and the momentum that we now feel, which, I think is really positive.
Yeah. Come here. Yeah. And we don't, and this is luckily the subject is kind of beyond us, and so it's kind of whatever, but that was that time period. I've been thinking about that lately, because I think I saw an article by the Atlantic or Slate or somebody who it was kind of like, we need to forgive each other for what happened during the quarantine days or whatever. And I think it's interesting to reconcile that, because people were so violently mad with each other. Mm-hmm. People, and I think that the divide is understandable more so than, what a clumsy idiot. The divide is understandable, like I was not, like in hindsight, I can just be frank about some of this stuff. Like,
Yeah.
I wasn't the type person that felt like people who were scared of the vaccine were immoral.
Yeah.
I was like, I get it. And I didn't think that people who were embracing the vaccine were immoral or stupid or like too trusting. It was like everybody really was just following their best instincts.
Yeah.
And, I think it was unfortunate. I remember when Eric Clapton came out and was kind of like, I'm not going to play places that require the vaccine because I don't fuck with that. And people so quickly were willing to be like, Eric who?
Yeah.
Fuck Eric Clapton. He's not even relevant anymore. And all
Right.
this shit. And it was like turning on artists if they weren't into it. And then people who were like that was the situation that a lot of us were in, because I was like, I pretty much just embraced it so that I could keep playing shows.
Right.
And then there was this question of like, well, which of my fans is going to be like, to what degree is this going to be a problem for me to like put out that I'm playing a show, but like there's this requirement. What role do I play in this now to like try to enforce this, to try to put the word out to my fans? Like, I'm playing at a venue that requires this. So you gotta like fall in line. Like, are they going to turn on me? Shit like that. It was a very uncomfortable time. I remember Coulter Wall kind of said "fuck it" to touring at the time because he was like, it's too political. I'm just not going to go play any shows.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think a lot of artists did. They were like, this is not worth the trouble on multiple fronts, on multiple sides. Look, it was, I mean, it was a challenging time, right? No one had lived through anything like this.
Yeah.
There was no like, okay, let's pull out the playbook because this is what you're supposed to do when this happens.
Right.
I mean, I remember at the time telling someone, it's kind of like driving down a road that's totally foggy without a map or any kind of GPS, and like your instinct is to tense up and to like be anxious, and your heartbeat races, and you're like, I don't really know where I'm going, and I can't see 5 feet in front of my car, and I don't know what to do. That's kind of what we were doing.
Yeah.
And so the natural inclination is to get tense and to stress, and people, to your point, it's already somewhat of a divisive culture at that point in time in the United States, still is. Here's another opportunity to show some division, versus like, okay, why don't we all try and like be somewhat unified here, which, maybe is like a, some sort of utopian ideal. But
I totally thought that was what would happen.
Right. I mean, I think, and I remember sitting here talking with you, and we were talking about like the music we listened to at that point in time. And I like totally reverted back to like 60s and 70s era soul music, because it was the music that I listened to from my parents' record collection sitting on the floor when I was a kid, and it was comforting, and it was like a warm blanket, and I think that was because there was so much stress and anxiety and divisiveness that I was like, I just want to listen to something that's going to like make me feel good right now.
Yeah.
Yeah,
absolutely, man. I hope that relationships and our sense of unity has been not just ours locally, but like throughout our culture. I hope some of this shit is lifted, but I really don't know. I don't talk to people about this shit too much, and I do still see the remnants of it in people's anticipation for the oncoming elections and stuff.
Yeah.
It's like definitely there's still division. Definitely there's still definitely culturally there's still people kind of competing for who gets to make the most sense of the culture and sort of like justify the most things. So we're not totally. Obviously, we're never going to reach kumbaya status. We're never going to be like totally at peace.
Right.
But, I think 2016 and on was kind of really, the shadows really showed, like the sun got the lowest.
Yes.
And I think, I hope that now the sun is rising a little bit, but
who knows?
Time will tell.
The next presidential election cycle and all of that will come, and we'll go, oh gosh, here we go again. Who knows?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I want to ask you this as candidly as possible. I'm inviting you to be as candid as possible. Sure. You have an interesting perspective of the music industry that I think, basically, again, I was kind of anticipating what questions I thought we would talk about before you came over, which I didn't really do as much last time. I wanted to hear what you think about like the status of the local scene, the health of the local scene, I guess, because I think from my perspective, a lot of the local scene is still kind of fledgling and kind of not in that same place. Like, I think that rightfully so within the industry, I think people are gravitating toward the stuff that's like kind of more the higher value ticket.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe they're not as responsive to some of the more local acts. I don't know if that's your perspective. That's just like my perception right now, but maybe you can shed light on whether that's even accurate or not.
Yeah, I mean, I think that for us specifically at the stuff at the Ramkat, the big name, big ticket shows are selling really quickly and really easily. Kind of what I would not even local, but more like the mid-size touring artist has gotten a little bit more difficult. And I think there's some seasonality to that. There's a lot of festivals now. I mean, there seems to be a new festival getting announced almost every week. And a lot of these artists were on ice for 18 months. And so a lot of people have been out playing. So there's a lot of shows, a lot of content in terms of tours and shows and artists on tour, various clubs or festivals, et cetera. I think that's going to start to slow down and go back into a more, not predictable, but more like what it was prior to the pandemic. I feel like everyone is trying at this point in time to like catch up, and to like, make up for lost time.
Yeah.
And so I think there's a little bit of that. In terms of the local stuff here in Winston-Salem and kind of our local music community, I've seen some stuff over the last year that is starting to give me like, okay, like the Winston music community is evolving a little bit. And there's some artists now that, we can put in Gas Hill that I know will probably sell the room out. I think that speaks to a couple things. One, I think there's some new artists out there who haven't been in Winston for 20 years, and so there's a bit of it, like not a shiny penny syndrome, but kind of like, hey, they're the new thing on the block, and hey, I want to go and see them and check them out because I haven't seen them a lot of times. And then there's also what we were talking about before, which is, hey, I spent 18 months in my house, watching Tiger King, and like I really miss live music, and so I'll go out and see anything to engage in live music, or I'll go out and support the artists that I love, and I'm going to be there at every show and buy tickets. Yeah, I've seen a lot of that. As it kind of about our local music community. Gas Hill, as it was intended originally, was like going to be like a cocktail lounge. We were going to focus on the big room and maybe do like some singer-songwriter stuff in there, DJs, but really weren't thinking about programming that specifically. And, when we opened, the garage closed, and I figured that something was going to come in that wake and there would be another kind of garage size or style room to open, and there really hasn't been. I don't know why that is, but from our perspective, as we were studying the business in our first 2 years, Richard very wisely was like, listen, we need to start programming this room. It doesn't always have to be music 5 nights a week, but like, I think we need to start doing this, one, because there's no other place in town and people need a place to play. And, we're a music venue and this is our business, and we need to serve the entire music community, not just ones that can fill, 1,000 seat capacity room like the Ramkat, which was, I give him all the credit. He was the one to say, we need to start pivoting from this thing quickly. Not only for the benefit and the health of our business, but also for the benefit and the health of the music community. The breweries have filled some of the void, maybe, that the garage once had. Is it a different approach or different kind of ethos as far as that platform is concerned? Yeah. I mean, you can't argue that any of the breweries are delivering the same experience that happens in the garage, for example.
Right.
But it's hard to argue. Hey, there's more places to play in Winston-Salem now. Now, does every artist and their personality and their music fit in those settings? Probably not. But if you want to go out and play live, you can. And there's a lot of opportunity around town to do it. And I can't help but think that's a good thing, right? So do I think there's room for another music venue in town that's, somewhat similar to Gas Hill? Absolutely. There is. We have Monstercade across town. I love their programming and what they do. It's very different than what we do.
Yeah.
And I would encourage and think that we have room for even more of that. Not only likely, a room of that size that would, complement, what the Monstercade does and what we do. But also, I'm not ignorant to think that there's not going to be a competitive room that will be of the same size as the Ramkat at some point in time in the future, near future, whatever it is. Mm-hmm. So in terms of the overall health of it, there aren't a ton of local bands that can put 500 people in a room right now. In the 90s, when I came to Winston, there were like 5, and I don't know what the total explanation for that is. I think there's a variety of factors as to why that's the case. But I will say that, there are artists and bands in Winston that are exciting to me. And whether they do it as their sole vocation or they do it as a hobby, that's, I think that's a little bit of each, but, for example, Maya, Camille, and Victoria, and what they're doing, it's pretty interesting. Mm-hmm. I love the music. I like the vibe of what they're doing. They just got back from their first kind of tour out in the world, and it seems to have gone pretty well, which is encouraging to me. It's like another data point that supports the fact that there is a music scene in Winston-Salem, and it's compelling, and I think that weird divide between Greensboro and Winston-Salem that like somehow exists near Colfax, on Business 40, seems to have melted a little bit. We have Drew Faust coming over and playing. Drew typically has played in Greensboro largely. Deshaun Hickman comes over and plays. Molly McGinn comes over and plays. I think that there is some opportunity to do even more of that, which is why when we announced Doc Stock, we made a very intentional push to say, let's get some Greensboro people involved in this, to not only help us spread the word of it over there, but also because we want to make sure that, or we think that it's a stronger music community if we can do some blending there and bringing people from Greensboro and hopefully sending Winston musicians over to Greensboro and playing the Flatiron or playing, wherever over there at this point in time. So, I'm optimistic on it.
Yeah.
I'm optimistic on it.
Let's talk about Doc Stock.
Yeah.
Where did this, where was this born? How was this born?
Yeah. So I was out with Billy Strings this past summer. I think we were in Montana, and they were talking about doing a celebration of Doc Watson for his 100th birthday. And I was like, wow, that's great. And, Billy, I think in multiple interviews has said that kind of his twin influences were his father, who taught him how to play guitar, and Doc Watson. And he kind of holds both of them. He just put out a record with his dad, but he holds them in the highest of regard. And in fact, the first 3 shows that I worked for Billy and photographed him was in Cary at Coca-Booth Amphitheater, sold out 3 nights by himself. And every night he walked on stage and he played a new Doc Watson cover, which told me a lot about him, like the respect for music history and those who came before him, that he knew where he was and that the audience would appreciate it if he did this, which I thought was really cool. At the first experience working with the guy, I was like, okay, this guy gets it, And so then fast forward a couple of months and they were like, yeah, we're thinking about doing this. Do you know anything about LJVM Coliseum? And I was like, yeah, I live like 3 miles from there. And so I got word that this was what was going to happen, and that they were going to do this celebration of Doc's 100th birthday in Winston-Salem over 2 nights the first week in March. And I was like, wow, this is awesome. What an opportunity. Let's try and put some programming together to support it and underpin it, because we're going to have a lot of music fans in town, not only folks who live here, but also people flying in from all over the country and probably the world, I don't know, to come and see these shows. And so Richard had heard about T. Michael Coleman's Doc at 100 program that he was putting forth. He and Jack Lawrence, 2 guys who played with Doc for the longest, I think, of anyone who'd played with Doc. And then Wayne Henderson, the famous luthier, was going to join him, and he also is a friend of Doc's. And we all, Richard reached out to him, came back and said, hey, they're doing this thing. Like, why don't we invite them to come in that week and do it here at the Ramkat? I was like, I think it's awesome. And so we reached out to them, and they were all for it. And so we put that together and announced it, and it sold out within 24 hours.
Hell yeah.
And I was like, okay, this is great. What else can we do? And so I called Lauren Desai and said, are you familiar with the concert film Three Pickers, which is Ricky Skaggs, Doc, and Earl Scruggs? She said, I think she was familiar with it at the time. It was filmed in Reynolds Auditorium here in Winston-Salem, and was on PBS. And so she said, yeah, I'll jump in and let's do it. Let's screen it at Aperture. And I was like, at first we kind of debated, is anyone going to come and watch something that's like readily available on DVD and on PBS's website probably. But heck, to get to see those 3 on stage in Winston, and see it on the big screen, I think it's going to be really cool.
Yeah.
And
the cinema experience still is quite different,
Right. And so then it was like, okay, one of the things that Richard and I have always done from the outset of opening the Ramkat was trying to involve community and find partners, Yeah. And so Aperture, great partner. With Doc at 100, Richard brought the Blue Ridge Music Center in as kind of a partner. So they were in on it. And we started to think about what we were going to do on the Friday and Saturday that Billy's going to be at the Coliseum. And we were like, well, it makes sense for us to do a late night thing. After the Coliseum, we'll do a late night show. Doors open at 10, music will go on at 11, and we'll get some great bands. And so we got John Stickley Trio from Asheville, Fireside Collective, who just won IBMA's New Artist of the Year last year, I think, in Raleigh. And they were ecstatic. And we're like, hey, let's do it. And then increasingly people started reaching out to us and saying, hey, we heard you're kind of putting something on. And then from there, reached out to our friends at Piedmont Federal, who've been great corporate sponsors and partners with us. And they said, yeah, we want to get involved in whatever way we can. And so really they have given us, kind of through their generous support, have made it such that all of the programming on before the Billy String Show on Friday and then all day on Saturday is going to be free, with a suggested donation of $5 to Industries for the Blind in honor of Doc Watson. And if you don't want to make the donation, that's fine. We'll still let you in, but we strongly encourage you and would really like you to make a donation to Industries for the Blind, another Winston-Salem organization that works with that community. And so it really kind of came together fairly naturally. And everyone we approached about it, from Lauren to, John Stickley and those folks to, the Doc at 100 folks and Wayne and T. Michael Coleman, to all of the artists that were presenting on Friday and Saturday, everyone was like, yeah, I want to be involved in that. Like, tell me how I get involved. How can we make this work? And then ultimately, when we kind of had all the pieces in place, we were like, we got to figure out like how to brand this and name it. And so I think we had a couple names, and Doc Stock kind of came out of the out the winter. And Woody Anderson, God bless her, one of my favorite local artists, went to Woody and said, would you want to do a poster for this? And what she came back with is the coolest poster that one of the coolest posters I've ever seen. I've seen a lot of concert posters. It's very much in her style, which I love her art. but it harkens back to the Woodstock poster of the guitar neck and the bird. But instead of the bird, there's a raccoon hanging from the guitar neck, and everyone who's a bluegrass fan would know that the raccoon is the mascot for Merlefest, which was a festival started in Doc's son's name and honor, and that Doc was a huge part of. And so when she came back with the poster, it was like, oh man, like this is perfect.
Yeah.
And so I'm really excited. I mean, Doc saw him a handful of times, photographed him a handful of times. His story is incredible. He's an icon of bluegrass music. He's an icon of North Carolina. And it's going to be a heck of a week in Winston-Salem, I mean, just with Billy being in town and, being a part of that organization for the last year, that's really exciting to me. They're all really excited to come to Winston. And what we're doing kind of to complement it and support it, I think is exciting too. And there's a lot of other stuff going on in the community. Both, I think a number of the breweries are like brewing special beers for it. The Fiddle and Fish guys are doing some programming and some concerts as well, and in their little parking lot area. So it's going to be, I mean, if you like music and live music, and you specifically like bluegrass music, there's going to be a lot of bluegrass music and talent in town that week. And that's awesome.
Yeah.
I think it's great.
Yeah, that's really sick, man.
Yeah.
And the name is sick, the poster's sick, all that shit is sick.
Yeah, I'm excited.
What made Billy pick Winston to pop this thing off at?
Yeah, I think it's because it's the closest place to Doc's hometown, to Deep Gap.
Okay.
Okay. I know that they had or were considering other places both in North Carolina and out. And I think it's a huge opportunity for Winston-Salem, truth be told. My understanding is it's Billy's intent to do something like this to celebrate Doc's birthday every year. Doc means that much to him. And so, I'm hopeful that we as a city and a community are going to put our best foot forward in a couple weeks, because I think we have an opportunity to have this become a regular event, for years to come. Yeah. And that's exciting to me. So, it's going to be a really, really cool week, and I'm really excited about it. Woody just emailed me and said she's starting to print the posters today, and was going to drop a couple off just so I could get a kind of a first look at some artist proofs tonight, and I can't wait to see it. It's going to be really cool, and we're already advancing everything with the bands, and everyone seems really excited about that. And we were a little bit apprehensive. We never really done the late night show kind of thing at the Ramkat before. In fact, when we opened, and we kind of stuck a stake in the ground and said that we were going to do doors at 7 and shows were typically going to start about 8:15. I remember, some feedback we got that people were like, "Oh, what are you guys, like a bunch of blue hairs? Like, what about starting doors at 9 or doors at 8 and show at 9?" And so like doing the even later was like, oh, are people really going to come and do this and want to do this after seeing, potentially seeing a 2.5, 3 hour show at the Coliseum? And we sold a bunch of tickets for it, so that's exciting. And it's like it's an opportunity to kind of broaden the possibilities of what we do at the Ramkat. It's like it's a test in a way, and so that'll be cool. We're going to be busy that week. I've already, I was talking to some of our guys on the team last night and just said, make sure you get some good sleep next week, because we are going to be really busy that week. But it's going to be a good busy. It's going to be exciting, and it's part of our kind of our 5-year anniversary, which is cool. It's like that's the first week of March. And then the second week of March, actually kind of on the day of our 5-year anniversary, is the Wood Brothers, and it's sold out.
Oh, yeah. That's going to be big.
Yeah. And so it's kind of like, and Los Lobos kind of starts it out on the Monday, so we kind of have Los Lobos, and then all of the Doc Stock stuff, and Billy Strings in town, and then the Wood Brothers, actually 2 concerts, the Wood Brothers and the Kruger Brothers, who are another great bluegrass band, the following week, which it's going to be great. So it's it came together really nicely with kind of celebrating 5 years in business.
Love it.
Yeah.
Love it.
Good.
Yeah, that's what you want.
Yeah.
And, the 5-year mark.
Right.
Billy is just such an anomaly to me. What he's accomplished and what he's become, and taking something in that world, the bluegrass world, and pushing it to the level that he has. I'm just so I'm so curious about him. You know,
Right.
Curious about what happened. Curious about like how it's like magic. You know,
Yeah.
It really is like magic.
Yeah, I agree. Was a fan before I met those guys and photographed them, and since those first gigs at Coca Booth until now, my respect for the whole thing, people, organization, ethos, is like gone off the charts. I mean, what he has done for that genre is just incredible. And then just, he is an artist and a person, and what he's done there, he is an impressive guy and an impressive artist. The band along with him. I mean, you couldn't put together a more incredible support network, musically speaking, in terms of his band. They are all incredibly gifted musicians, and him fronting the whole thing and being who he is, not only as an artist and musician, but as an appreciator of music and music history. He has a deep knowledge of it. It's not like fabricated in any way, shape, or form. It's like he loves music, and he appreciates the history of it all, and appreciates kind of his place in it, which I think is always, if you find an artist like that, that's the kind of the ideal in my way, shape, and kind of the way I think about things. And just been a real gas to hang out with. The shows are incredible. Again, a really interesting blend of people who go to Billy String shows. You get like kind of the hardcore bluegrass fans, you get kind of the hippie fans, and kind of a lot of everything in between. It reminds me strangely of like Petty's audience that I watched that day walk through the gates at the Gorge. And I don't know, is it a universality of kind of what his music does and like the emotions that it elicits? Maybe, I think there's something to that. I think people gravitate to his story. He's got a pretty interesting story, being kind of this kid who came up in Michigan playing bluegrass with his dad. Michigan not known as a hotbed of bluegrass music.
Exactly.
And just the fact that this guy came out of that and has thrived and is arguably leading bluegrass into 2023 and beyond. That's exciting. And I've had the opportunity to talk to older bluegrass musicians, Bela Fleck namely, about Billy, and he's like, man, like he came along at the exact right time. If you think about kind of the handing off of the tradition from people like Earl Scruggs to Bela Fleck, and like that whole newgrass revival generation of Sam Bush and Jerry Douglas and Bela Fleck, those guys are all late 60s, early 70s now. Yeah. And for this young man to kind of come along in their wake, having been inspired by them, he still has a great love and respect of the tradition of the music that came before those guys. And, heck, a lot of that whole newgrass generation of bluegrass musicians got a lot of flack, because they were coming on in the wake of these guys who all wore suits and were pretty clean cut. And then, you cut to Newgrass Revival and it looked like a bunch of hippie guys with long hair and beards on stage. And it was like, who are these guys? And they were stretching the songs out and, playing them in slightly different ways, and now you see someone like Billy coming in the wake of Bela Fleck and Sam Bush and Jerry Douglas, kind of standing on their shoulders, still playing that old traditional, the traditional stuff of, the Ralph Stanleys and the Doc Watsons and the Earl Scruggs, but also taking what Newgrass Revival did and expanding it even further. And that's really cool, and so I can't say enough about him. I can't say enough about him, the band, the organization in general. It's first class all the way around, and he deserves everything that he's getting right now. And he's, all the shows are selling out across his tour.
Yeah.
Every show that I shot, I think this summer was sold out.
You know? I feel like he is one of a handful of people that are indicative of some sort of a swelling that's taken place, because like every music enthusiast, not people who like are like 1 foot in, 1 foot out.
Yeah.
People who give a fuck
Yeah.
and like identify with music heavily. I hear them mostly talking about Billy, about Tyler Childers, about Sierra.
Yep.
And I'm not really sure who else.
Yeah.
Like those three are the seem to have grabbed a torch and kind of taken traditional music into this place where it's very cool, where people feel like it's cool again. Mm-hmm. Particularly Billy.
Yeah.
Like just the images, just the way that he approaches his shows and stuff. Like, and he's playing goddamn Coliseums. It's crazy. It's fucking crazy.
I know. I watched him. Sorry to interrupt you.
No, it's good.
We're in Montana, and Royal Massat, his bass player, had a family emergency and had to leave. And so I got to the venue that day, and they're like, hey, it's going to be a little bit of a weird show. We don't really know what's going to happen or how this is going to unfold. Billy and the remaining members will probably play together. They might do some duo and trio stuff and really kind of mix the whole thing up. And this is in front of like 7,000 people in an amphitheater in Bozeman or Missoula. I can't remember which. One of the two. Missoula, I think, and it's probably Bozeman. You can run a graphic underneath here. It's like it was actually Bozeman.
Breaking
Breaking
news.
Yeah. So anyway, I was like, wow, this would be really interesting. And the band from Montana that Billy's close with, the Kitchen Dwellers, he called them and were like, hey, you guys want to come out and like help try and figure this whole thing out? And so they all showed up as well. But to open the show, Billy walked out in front of 7,000 people and sat on a stool by himself and played, I think, like for about 30 minutes. And I wrote about it on an Instagram post because I got a picture standing directly behind his stool of this amphitheater, completely sold out. People literally, he's got them in the palm of his hand. They were just completely in. And it was one of the most impressive things I've ever seen someone do. Here's a music that is, when the full band's there, it's got, momentum and a ton of energy. And for him to go out and play solo acoustic in front of that number of people and still captivate them, I thought was one of the coolest things I've ever seen. And as I was walking off the stage, his manager was standing there, and I told him, I was like, that was really cool. And it's genre be damned, it was one of the punkest things I'd ever seen anyone do.
Yeah.
Just totally owned it. Walked out. I think he said something along the lines of, hey, Royal had this family emergency and we contemplated kind of rescheduling. He's like, but I've got my, 10 fingers and I've got breath in my lungs and I've got the rest of the guys and some friends. And so we're going to do this, and we really don't know how this is going to go, but I'm going to start by just playing you guys some songs. And the place erupted, and it was just like, wow.
Yeah.
That was really, really cool. And I've seen some, I think I said in the Instagram post, I've been very lucky to have been in the presence of musicians who are legends, and this was one of the most legendary moves I've witnessed with my own eyes.
You've had a knack throughout the conversation of tapping in exactly to what I was kind of thinking about as you go through the story. Mm-hmm. As you were talking about that, the question that came to my mind was, you have been around some legendary artists, some significant people, and as we were talking about, we were curious a little about the health of the local scene. And I think here's the fucked up question I want to ask. A lot of people that we work with, people that you and I both know, there are a lot of artists who are in a place where they're a part of a local economy and they can imagine themselves being a part of a bigger one. They want to be on the world stage, but that's like a very far away thing for them. What, after being around all these artists and and seeing all the things you've seen, what is it aside from natural talent, aside from luck or whatever the fuck, like aside from other little things, within reason, like what is something that you think you could say you saw in some of these legendary acts that, like, if more small artists knew about it or thought about it or incorporated it into who they were, like it might be something important for them to think about for their art?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think it's two things, I guess, from my perspective. All of the artists that I've been around who I would well, first, there's something that is completely undefinable and kind of defies even description, and that's like they've got it, and you can see it. And all of the artists that I've, or a lot of the artists that I've worked with, Billy certainly, Petty, a number of the artists I've worked with had or have it, and even artists who played to 25 people that I've seen in Gas Hill Drinking Room, there's glimpses of it. And you're like, oh man, they've got it too, and I couldn't tell you what it is, but it when you see it, at least I do. I feel like I do. So that's one piece of it. The other common thread I would say amongst some of those artists is like a deep appreciation for music history and what came before them and how they're tied into that thread, and they're pulling on that same string of generations of artists ahead of them. Leon Bridges, for example, absolutely deep appreciation for the musicians and artists that he loves and admires, and the lineage of those artists and how he kind of fits into that lineage. And whether that is, you could go down so many different routes with him specific to his music, but he also is the kind of artist he likes to turn that on its head a little bit. He's known to be, when he came out, kind of this retro soul thing, artist, and quickly, into the second album was like, hey, I want to be not retro. I want to be like an R&B artist. And so I think that's kind of what Good Thing, in terms of that record and recording in those songs, maybe some of the intent was like, hey, I'm not just this one trick pony that sounds like something that came out of Stax in 1968.
Smart move.
Yeah, right. And then one would argue that his collaboration with Khruangbin and doing that is taking, people's expectation of him and putting him with a band and going, okay, I can also do this with this other artist that's an entity unto itself, and we can collaborate, and it's something completely new and different than what either one of us does. And LB, that guy's got like gospel country records that he's already recorded that are unbelievable. And so, but he has a huge and deep relationship with music and music history. He's not just someone who's like, hey, I want to be, the next flavor of the month. He's like, I want to be here, and I want to be here for a long time. Yeah. And Billy definitely has that, and Petty, absolutely understood the lineage. He could point to the time in which he saw Elvis for the first time and was like it got to his core, and then to become friends with George Harrison, one of his heroes, and being just the massive Beatles nut that he was, that opportunity, and Roy Orbison, that's almost as close to Elvis as he could come, Roy Orbison, a peer and contemporary of Elvis, operatic voice, the whole 9 yards. I know, and had discussions with Tom about how incredible that made him feel that he was actually going to get to be in a band with Roy Orbison. Like that weight and that, just the understanding why that's important, I guess, and kind of understanding that, you're part of a continuum. The great ones seem to have that sense innately about them. I don't know. Maybe they don't. Maybe someone tells it to them and says you need to understand and appreciate this. But my experience being around some of those artists and just talking to them about music, all three of those people that I just described that I've worked with closely all had it in them, and it was like, oh, you're listening to this, you should check this out. Oh, why should I? Oh, well, you don't know about this, and it was like, huh. You've done your homework.
Yeah.
you know music. You're a musicologist, despite the fact that you're also, a world famous artist. That is definitely something that I at least a common thread that I've seen in all of the ones that I've worked with, the great artists that I've worked with.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I asked that, because I believe that having our local scene is important, but sometimes I'm like I'm wondering what that means exactly, because it's like our local artists often aren't hoping that that's all they are.
Sure.
Some people, that is what they do. Like
Sure.
they just want to play in their town and they serve that purpose. Glad they're here,
Yeah.
but some people want to get out there and be a part of the larger world, and I think hearing a bit of that, and appreciating how big that world is, it probably makes a lot of sense as far as like understanding the world that you're trying to be a part of.
Right.
Because understanding how old it is and how many other people are in that world and all the intricate pieces of it,
Yeah, I mean, this might be relevant, but a young man called me about a week or so ago and had seen some of my work, realized that I lived here in Winston, and didn't know about the Ramkat, I don't think, but he direct messaged me through Instagram and said, hey, I'm a photographer. I live in Winston, kind of trying to do the concert photography thing. Would you want to grab a cup of coffee? I was like, sure, yeah. And I've done that a handful of times, over the course of here in Winston specifically, since we moved back in 2008. And so we got together over at Cranky's, sat down for coffee. I said, so you really want to do this? And he's like, yeah, I've been doing photography for a long time, and I've been going to shows for a long time, and it really never dawned on me that, like, oh, I love this and I love this. Maybe I could combine these things and start shooting, concerts. And it sounds flippant, but I said this to him. I was like, listen, if you have any other skill sets, like anything else that you're good at, that like you could earn a living doing, go do that. And he was like, really? And I was like, yeah. I was like, but if you have a burning desire that is not going to go away, and that deep in your heart is what you want to do and what you're passionate about, then do this. But if there's other opportunities or other options on the table for you, pursue those. If you have other interests at all, if you're going to do this, it's a pretty specific thing, and there's not a ton of people out there who are making a ton of money doing it. I mean, the community is fairly small, and pretty insular. But hey, man, like if it's something that is burning in your heart to do, then follow that passion. And I guess that's maybe another part of that, of what we were talking about. What's the commonality between some of these artists that that's that there's just something burning inside them to go and pursue this thing.
Yeah.
With Petty famously, in their documentary, driving across the country from Gainesville to Los Angeles to go and get the record deal, and he shows up at Mel's Diner in Hollywood, and he goes to the phone booth at Mel's, and on the floor of the phone booth, he looks down, there's a little scrap piece of paper, and he picks it up, and it's a list of all the record labels in town, which at the time, initially he was like, oh, great, I got all the names of the labels and the phone numbers. This is great. I'll just start calling it down. And then he realized, oh, someone else is doing this too.
Yeah.
And it was like, oh, okay. And
how convenient.
Right. And then, Mudcrutch gets their record deal and it falls apart and everyone kind of scatters. And then the Heartbreakers kind of rise from, the ashes of Mudcrutch. All of that takes a burning desire in your heart to chase something because you believe strongly that it's what you're kind of destined to do. And you could say the same thing about Leon Bridges. You could say the same thing about Billy Strings. And so I think that there is that too, which is like, hey, if you can go and earn a living doing something else, go do it, because this is going to be really hard, and it's a long shot in a lot of ways. But if you can't live without it, go do it, And so I shared that with the young man that I met with a couple weeks ago. And hey, last night he showed up at the Ramkat with his camera and was like, I want to come and shoot. And I said, yeah, absolutely. Went and talked to the band. They were like, yeah, we're fine with it. And, he's a younger guy and went out and shot, and I think it went great. Went great. Yeah.
Well, that is our cue. 1 second, Chris. That is our cue, I guess. My next guest is here.
Thank you for doing this again.
I feel like, honest to God, I feel like I could talk to you for 2 more hours, and I wouldn't get bored. Thank you for coming back.
Yeah.
And
anytime.
Yeah, let's do it some more whenever we get a chance. So
let's go get coffee again. That's fun too.
All right, cool. All right. Andy, thanks, man.
Yeah, take it easy.